is Murder in the Rain, where each week Emily Rowney, Alicia Holland, and Josh McCullough tell true crime stories of the Pacific Northwest. Murder in the Rain contains graphic content. Listener discretion is advised. In last week's episode, Leave Us Alone, we discussed the Cline Falls Axe Attack from 1977. College students Terri Jentz and Avra Goldman were in Oregon starting their summer cycling trip across the TransAmerica Trail. A few days into their trip, they were attacked while camping in Cline Falls State Park. The attacker drove his vehicle over the women's tent, got out, and hacked at them with a hatchet. Miraculously, both women survived, albeit differently. Avra Goldman, whose vision was impacted from the blows to her head on the night of the attack, didn't remember a thing. She resumed her life, graduating from Yale and going on to get a medical degree from Yeshiva University in New York. Terri Jentz did remember. In fact, not a day went by that she didn't see the history of that night written all over her body. As she described her story to the people she met, she would roll up her sleeve to show them her, quote, perfect axe cut. And while she told the story countless times, often combining words with laughter and brightness as if telling an exciting story that didn't happen to her, it did, and she carried it every day. In the stiffness of her healed body, in the sleeping bag and bicycle from that night that she still kept, in her fear of speeding cars and everyday objects like certain types of fabric or light, in every scar, in the obsession she had with extraordinary news stories, and in the grief she carried due to the loss of her friendship with Avra, whom she no longer interacted with. In Strange Piece of Paradise, Terri wrote about her ordeal and her life thereafter. Much of it explores her inner thoughts as she navigated through life and dissected her emotions and motivations. In one scene, she described how a colleague once told her, after finding her quietly sitting by herself, that she looked like a puppeteer had left her body. Upon reflecting on that comment, she wrote, "I wasn't fully inhabiting my body. Maybe you could say part of my soul fled into the desert that night back in June 1977, fled the instant the truck struck my chest. Maybe you could say it abandoned my fragile, mortal body, and it hadn't yet climbed back in." So what was a woman to do but go find that part of herself that fled? After 15 years of living without that part of herself, she finally sold her bike and disposed of her blood-stained sleeping bag. She also decided to take pen to paper and write a book about her own story. Her own story would turn into more: the recollections of the people who remembered what happened in Cline Falls, and the search for the man that was never punished for what he did. Terri decided the only way to write her book was to go back to Oregon in the place where that fateful night occurred. And in October of 1992, she packed up her car, picked up her friend, and drove from LA to Oregon. Terri had resigned herself to retrace the trail she had taken before she was attacked. She would go to Cline Falls State Park and see where her story would lead her from there. But first, Terri had to go to Salem to get her hands on the police report about what happened in Cline Falls. She had called Deschutes County before her trip. Deschutes County is where the cities of Bend and Redmond reside. When she called, she was told that the records had been destroyed, so if she wanted to get any information, she'd have to go straight to the state police. Once she arrived at the state police in Salem, they handed over the report, and unfortunately, that's when she learned that after a 3-year investigation, a meager 30-page report had been compiled. On the front page, she saw the words "attempted murder" typed next to her name, and as she flipped through the pages, she realized that there had never been arrests made. The documents listed the victims, the weapon, interview notes from potential witnesses, and a description of what happened. Here's an excerpt. On the late evening of June 22, 1977, 2 young female bicyclists camping at the Cline Falls State Park near Redmond were assaulted. The victims had retired to bed in a small camp tent near the Deschutes River. A vehicle operated by an unknown male subject was driven over a curb, across the lawn, and onto the tent occupied by the 2 victims. The assailant subsequently attacked the victims with an axe-type weapon, causing severe head wounds, and fled the scene. It went on to describe the scene, quote, Cline Falls Park is located 5 miles west of Redmond on Highway 126. The park is a state-controlled rest area on the east bank of the Deschutes River. It is used by both local residents and the traveling public as a picnic facility, swimming, and fishing. There's an access road about a fourth mile in length leading from Highway 126 to the grounds. There's a one-way circular driveway through the park with restrooms at the north end and a large parking area at the southern portion. The victims had situated a two-man tent near the riverbank. Tire impressions were noted leaving the paved roadway over a 7-inch curb and traveling in a near half-circle type maneuver. The tracks led back to the roadway to the curb and pavement. Near the apex of the turning tire impressions was a large quantity of blood in the grassy portion of the park. There were 5 different interviews with witnesses that described a man with a red truck being near the campsite, and yet not much more. It appeared no one attempted to try to find the man.
Emily, in the crime scene photo that I've seen and what you just described, the big swath or swatch of blood on the ground, it was hard for me to tell, well, I still don't know, where that blood generated from, because that's not where the tent was, right? The blood stain
No.
is right on the edge of the asphalt of the
Yeah.
little lane and the campground. So it's like right on the grass.
I couldn't tell for certain, but from what I gathered, that's from Terri. So as you know, she got up, ran to her friend, ran to her bike, ran to the road. I think
Oh.
that's where she was standing when she was talking to the people in the
Oh, and
truck.
she was just pouring blood. I always assumed it was like something that when the truck hit them, like, or maybe the blood got like collected in the tent or something, and when he drove around, it like dumped it out. But
No,
it makes sense that she was
yeah,
standing right there because that's where they would have been parked.
exactly.
I
And
never thought. Yep.
I definitely think there was no like blood from her until the hatchet.
Yeah.
So that makes the most sense. But she was standing there for quite a bit, like running to them, flagging them down, talking to them. And they said she was bleeding profusely, like totally head to toe covered in blood. There were other notes on suspicious activity in the area. A man named Stephen Douglas Malik had attacked 2 young female hitchhikers with a wrench in 1974. Police considered that he could have possibly returned and used another toolbox item as a weapon. There was also another man, Joseph Hamilton Stegner, who was in custody for beating a female hitchhiker with an unknown weapon. He had also been a suspect for another case where a woman was murdered in an Oregon park. And yet, the file didn't seem to allude to police making any effort to investigate these men. In the final few pages of the report, Terri finally saw the name of a single suspect, Richard Wayne Godwin. In the very late night hours of October 1st, 1976, Loretta Tolentino, Jack Wheeler, and Loretta's 2 children, a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl, were driving through Oregon and making their way to Idaho. Loretta was looking to start over and chose the city of Post Falls, Idaho. The family took a break on their road trip in Blue River, Oregon, a small town about halfway between Eugene and Redmond. They pulled up to the Forest Glen Cafe Cougar Room Lounge and parked. The kids were asleep, the boy in the front and the girl in the back, so Loretta and Jack left them in the car so they could take a quick break. The cafe bar closed around 1:30 a.m. on October 2nd. Loretta and Jack returned to their car to get back on the road, and that's when Loretta saw the blanket that had previously been covering her sleeping daughter on the ground behind the station wagon. As her eyes drifted up, she realized her rear window, which had an outside crank to unroll it, was down, and her daughter, 5-year-old Andrea, was no longer there. As Andrea would not have been able to open the back window from the inside, it was quickly determined that she had been kidnapped. A 2-day search of the area commenced, but she was not found. By Monday, the search was called off. 2 other girls of similar ages would be found dead near the area, and each time one of those little bodies was found, it was thought that it could be Andrea. But they weren't, and unfortunately, the mystery of what happened to her would go on for 2 more years, until police got word from an inmate who said he knew who killed Andrea Tolentino and where they could find her body. Floyd Forsberg was imprisoned because he murdered 20-year-old Denise Catlin in Bend, Oregon in 1975. In 1979, Forsberg told authorities he could help solve 6 homicide cases. So your first question might be, what was he hoping to gain from exchanging information? Forsberg said he simply wanted FBI agent Stanley Renning to take a lie detector test and answer 6 questions. Now, I'm not sure what those questions were, but it's likely something to do with his own murder case from 1975. Forsberg was already awaiting trial for a $1 million bank robbery he had committed in Reno, and he was also standing accused of another murder from 1974, an accountant that was murdered in Portland. He claims another inmate, Roderick Addict, was the one to blame, and by giving up these 6 murders, maybe he could gain credibility with authorities, and in return, who knows, maybe he could get himself a new trial because he said he was wrongly accused of that murder. Now, a trade must have occurred because Forsberg held up some end of his bargain. He led investigators to the remains of a 5-year-old missing girl, and he told them that a man named Godwin, whom he met in prison, had confessed to everything. Richard Wayne Godwin, or Bud Godwin as he was referred to, was arrested for the rape and sodomy of a 5-year-old Springfield girl in the early 70s. And like many of the cases we present, let the disappointment set in because, of course, those charges were dropped, and it wouldn't be the last time those types of charges would surface for Godwin. In 1977, he was convicted for sodomizing his 5-year-old niece in Cottage Grove. He was eventually let out of prison, and while on probation for that crime in 1979, he was arrested for molesting his 5-year-old daughter. You see a pattern there?
Mm-hmm.
For the probation violation, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. While in prison, Godwin apparently confided in Forsberg about all of the other crimes he committed. Now, why would he do this? Well, that's because when I say confided, I mean he leveraged the knowledge of his crimes he committed for protection from someone in prison who is more powerful than him, Floyd Forsberg. Child rapists don't do really well in prison, so he was looking for some help. Forsberg was more than happy to hear everything Godwin had to say. He wouldn't just protect him in prison. He would use that information to get in the good graces of the people who put him behind bars. The first of Godwin's crimes that he would use to make progress on his goal was to help police locate the remains of 5-year-old Andrea Tolentino. Forsberg claimed that Godwin not only confessed to him, but wrote it all in a letter and even drew a map of where they could find her. Now, when they asked for that letter, he refused to give it to police, but he committed the map to memory and even walked police to the girl's remains himself. About 50 feet from the area he led them to, off a remote logging road, they found 9 human bones and 2 teeth several inches below the ground. That accuracy instilled confidence in the police that he was right about Godwin. Eventually, they even struck evidence gold in Godwin's mobile home in Springfield, Oregon. In a paper bag hidden in his closet, they found a skull that had been used as a candle holder. It was a real human skull, and that of a child, no less. Upon forensic testing, authorities were able to match the remains with the skull. The 2 teeth found with the remains fit perfectly into the skull that was found in Godwin's house. Godwin was eventually indicted in 1979 for murdering Andrea. He pleaded guilty and admitted to rolling down the window of the Tolentino station wagon, abducting the sleeping girl, putting her in his car, and driving her to the woods where he raped her and then choked her to death. For his crimes, Godwin was sentenced to 17 years to life. The forensic analysis also showed evidence that Godwin had previously had sex with the skull, a little fact that would help keep him from earning parole multiple times. Now, Forsberg didn't stop there with the snitching. He claims Godwin committed other serious crimes. In this list was the abduction and murder of a 35-year-old Eugene teacher named Kay Turner, who disappeared while on a run near Camp Sherman. Her body was found in nearby woods months later. He also accused him of the 1977 drowning of a 6-year-old boy whose body was found in a mill pond and originally deemed an accidental drowning. And finally, he claimed Godwin was to blame for the Cline Falls Axe Attack. Godwin said this was not true. Yes, he killed the 5-year-old girl, but he had nothing to do with the other crimes. In fact, he went on to take multiple polygraphs, and in every test, he passed. And in some cases, he even had an alibi. Though in 1979, police told Marvin Jentz that their single suspect was cleared of the attack thanks to a polygraph, the case notes Terri read in Salem didn't exactly clear him. Police seemed to think he could still be their man, and yet no one put any time or effort into looking into it. Terri found herself making a pro and con list of sorts on whether or not Bud Godwin could be the cowboy. So let's start with the pros. Bud Godwin drove a maroon 1976 Chevy pickup with a white camper. If you recall from last week, this was very similar to the vehicle multiple witnesses claim was in the park that day. Forsberg told police that Godwin had a motive. He had been having a sexual affair with his niece, Robin Williams. Now, that name may ring a bell for you, and no, I do not mean the late comic that gave us the iconic character of Mrs. Doubtfire, but Robin Williams was one of the witnesses in the Cline Falls attack. In our episode, Leave Us Alone, I described that a group of teens were in the park that night around 11 p.m. 14-year-old Robin told police she saw a man she described as in his 30s, about 5'9", wearing a light shirt and jeans. Now, this somewhat describes her uncle, but I would think she would have recognized her own uncle, right? Why would that not have been a part of the interview? But it is quite interesting that this man's niece happened to be in the park the day of the attack, and now his name is coming up as someone who may have been involved. So Godwin, who is currently in prison while they're unfolding this, is accused of, technically grooming and raping his niece, and that he had a motive because she had moved on and maybe was there with another man.
I don't remember if there was any sort of description of Godwin
There
as far as
is.
his, the neatness of the cowboy torso. Does that match up with who Bud Godwin is? I feel like maybe, I don't want to answer the question for you, but he just seemed, the child's skull just seems much different than the sort of thing that
Agreed.
the truck attack
And
is.
I think, and I'll talk a little bit about this coming up, but the motive is very different, right? I mean, you don't really see that happen in too many criminals, going from traditional motive that he clearly does 5-year-old, and then suddenly these two grown women. He also is not neat, and we'll talk a little bit more about his description in a few minutes.
Yeah, the nature of his crimes really kind of made me think that he might be, disgusting.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. According to Forsberg, Godwin was having a sexual relationship with his niece, Robin. He believed that Godwin mistook the two girls in the tent as his niece, aka the child that he would have been grooming and raping. He thought she was there with another man, and that sent him into a rage, and that he wanted to teach them a lesson, and that's when he drove over the tent and attacked the girls with a hatchet. Yeah.
I don't buy that. Especially,
seems like a stretch.
Because I remember something that stuck with me from last week as the lone person in the room that doesn't know the case really well.
Mm-hmm.
When he was slow with the axe, when he was taking his aim, and he had already struck another woman that wasn't his niece. So, okay, she's not there with another man, and you can see that it's not your niece. So that doesn't really compute.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Now, what about the cons? Well, after these allegations surfaced, Robin denied any claims that she had any involvement with her uncle, Bud Godwin. She mentioned how when she was younger, she was a little bit scared of him, for good reason. But as she got older, they were actually quite close, but it never was inappropriate. He also took a polygraph, and the results indicated that he had nothing to do with the attack. Though it was never proven that he had anything to do with the Cline Axe attacks, it would have been easy for police to believe he had and never pursue it. After all, this guy was sent to prison where he sits to this day, and the Cline Falls case couldn't have been prosecuted because of the statute of limitations for attempted murder. So if you were in charge of this case and could delude yourself enough to believe he did do it, what's the harm in closing the case forever? To Terri, that was terrible and infuriating. There was always a chance Godwin would get out of prison. If you recall, his sentence was 17 years to life, and life varies, right? It often means parole at some point. So her fear was whether he did it or not, he's a bad guy and he could get out and do that again. Wouldn't it allow the people of the area to sleep more soundly if they knew without a doubt that the person who committed the Cline Falls crime was located, the weapon found, their tires matched the tire treads left at the scene, or perhaps a confession? Though Godwin was by any description a monster, Terri didn't think he was the neat and tidy cowboy that stood over her body holding a hatchet. Godwin's prison records note that he's 5'6". Terri remembered her attacker clearly as 5'10" to 5'11", meaning Godwin was 4 to 5 inches shorter. As he was born in July of 1945, he would have been 32 years old, and Terri was adamant that her attacker was younger. She studied his pictures that could be found with his prosecution records and tried to envision Bud's face where the faceless cowboys had been, and it just didn't seem to fit with the meticulous cowboy. Terri also educated herself on the different types of offenders. As she considered what she learned about offenders who the FBI categorized as either disorganized or organized, she realized Godwin would be considered organized. He took the time to cover his tracks and hide a body during his crime. He showed evidence of grooming other victims, which takes control, patience, and planning. The person who attacked her could be considered disorganized. The motive was hazy, the tire tracks were left behind, allowing the police to not only map out the events of the night, they even had evidence to match a vehicle against. And while the weapon wasn't left behind, there was no attempt to clean up the crime scene. He even left victims who caught a glimpse of him alive.
It's interesting that the Godwin guy looks and is like this disgusting person, but he's considered organized. And then here's this guy who's like the clean cut,
Yep.
well put together, but because it was so chaotic, it's disorganized.
And
How
that's
interesting.
that's the interesting thing about crime. It's like it doesn't really have anything to do with your appearance most of the
Yeah.
time. A lot of like planned, organized people are also like really good about their grooming and stuff.
Right.
But in a lot of cases, you can't match up the killer to their
Mhm.
looks, you know? Terri managed to get on the phone with Godwin's ex-wife, Martha, who confirmed that he was highly intelligent, wore jeans, but never dressed as a cowboy. He also wasn't someone that would ever be described as tidy. Godwin was a serial child molester. Why would he change his motive and kill two adult strangers? Sure, organized people can get enraged just like anyone else. And maybe the story about his niece was true and he killed them thinking it was her. It just didn't seem likely. So if the Hatchet Man wasn't Godwin, who could it have been? After visiting Oregon in 1992, gathering the sparse police report, making contact with a few people who had worked on the case, and failing to contact Bill Penhollow, the teen who had saved her and now refused to speak to her, Terri returned home to California. She stewed on what she had learned. The little information she got from the police reports and her repeated calls to people involved in the case didn't get her any closer to a suspect. In fact, it pushed the actual suspect a bit further away in her mind, and thus she made little progress on healing herself and returning that part of herself that was lost. So she went back to Oregon several times from 1994 to 1997. While sitting in a hotel room in Sisters, Oregon, Terri reread the police report and her eyes fixed on the notes regarding her rescue. Quote, at 6:05 p.m., 6/27/77, William Lyle Penhollow was interviewed regarding his actions and observations on the late evening of 6/22/77 when he found the injured girls at Cline Falls Park. As near as he could estimate, it was about 11:30 p.m., 6/22/77, when he entered the park with his girlfriend. As he was slowly driving through the one-way entrance, he saw a flashlight in the grassy area to his right. He could hear a female crying out for help, stating something about being run over and attacked, and she was afraid her friend might die. He later learned that this was Terri Jentz. He helped the other girl into the cab of his pickup. She was semi-conscious and both were bleeding badly. At the Jentz girls' insistence, he took all of their property in the back of his pickup, and Jentz rode to the hospital in the back of his vehicle. He was unsure, but thought he delivered the girls to the Redmond Hospital between 11:30 p.m. and 11:45 p.m. While he was in the park, he did not observe any other vehicles except a pickup some distance away, turning around near the restroom. He was occupied with the two injured girls and noted only that the vehicle was equipped with some kind of covering in the back similar to a canopy. Reading this reminded Terri that she needed to talk to Bill. On her previous visit, she spoke to someone who was acquainted with the family and offered to contact them on her behalf and try to set up a meeting. The family declined. Apparently, Bill had a hard time with what happened. Initially, he was hailed a hero, and that propelled him through the first few months of life after rescuing the girls. But eventually, the trauma set in. He had sleepless nights and nights filled with terrifying dreams. The family didn't want to make that trauma worse, so they had declined talking to Terri. But she wanted to try again. Perhaps he could help by giving her a puzzle piece to the strange puzzle she was trying to put together.
I'm sorry. I understand he's experienced trauma. She's trying to solve her attempted murder where she was axe attacked and driven over.
Also, I think they were making a guess. Like, I don't think anyone actually asked him.
Oh, they were all like protecting him.
Yeah.
And
like,
I get that. And I'm sure he had a horrible trauma from it. But that's just like, that's hard to understand
It
why
is.
you would like, no, sorry, I can't talk
And
to
I think
you.
that's why she wanted to try again. And she did it a little bit differently this time. Terri wrote Bill a letter and she basically said, "I'm coming for a visit." Terri made her way to the Penhallows home where she met Bill's parents, Clyde and Carol Ann, and she explained who she was and learned that Bill happened to be out of town. But it wasn't because he was avoiding her. He had something to do, but he actually told his family he was expecting her. So everyone was prepared for her visit. Now, apparently times had changed because the family was more than happy to talk to her this time. As they chit-chatted, Terri looked at photos on the wall and a woman arrived. Now, this was Bill's girlfriend, Lorene. Right away, there was this energy about Lorene, and Terri and her were just kind of drawn to each other. Lorene had a keen interest in the Cline Falls Axe Attack, and she was super eager to discuss it. Terri told her all about Godwin, the single suspect noted in the police records, to which Lorene assured her she knew who did it. It wasn't Godwin. It was Richard Joseph Dam, known as Dick Dam, the Hatchet Man. Terri was taken aback by what Lorene had just told her, that she knew Dick Dam had done it. This man, her cowboy attacker, had a local nickname. She needed to know everything. Lorene started with a story that helped paint a picture of who Dick Dam was. Dick was a 17-year-old high school student. He was attractive, tall, and lean, and he was known to have a violent temper. Most people knew not to piss him off, but that temper didn't keep him from having girlfriends because, like a lot of terrible men, he had charisma and drew girls into him. Years before, in the summer of 1977, Lorene had a job with a bunch of other teenagers on a seed ranch in Terrebonne where they dug up onions. Just a day or two after the attack in Cline Falls, Lorene said there was a disturbance while at work. One of the teenage girls that worked on the crew, Janie, was dating Dick Dam. That day, he drove onto the ranch, ran up to Janie, and in a low voice suggested that they needed to leave and that she didn't know what he had done. He got more insistent, but Janie continued to refuse him. They ended up fighting, which quickly turned physical. Dick pulled her into a pond nearby and kept pushing her head underwater and hitting her in the face. Throughout the story, Terri picked up on many clues. Dick Dam often got angry. He did drugs, and he had a pickup. Lorene claimed to have once seen him sitting on the tailgate of his pickup truck, cleaning the initials DD that he had carved into a piece of wood. It looked like he was cleaning blood out of the initials. When asked, he said he had been killing coyotes, and that's where the blood came from. Perhaps that wood was actually the handle of a hatchet, the one that was used on Terri and Avra. She also learned that not only was Dick fit, tall, and attractive, like she remembered her attacker being, he was known to dress like a cowboy, wearing cowboy-style shirts, belts, boots, and Wrangler jeans. Lorene went on to say that Bill had seen the headlights of a pickup that night when they saved the girls.
Dick Dam dressed like a cowboy, but he wasn't in any way a cowboy, right?
As far as I know, yeah. I think one of the guys in the story describes 3 different types of cowboys.
Yeah, I
the
remember
ones that dress like them, the ones that actually are. I don't remember the third one.
And then the third one was the ones that are too drunk to even
right.
get on a horse. Yeah.
Right. And he was a drunk cowboy,
yeah.
by the way. Lorene went on to say that Bill had seen the headlights of a pickup truck the night when he saved the girls. And that's the one that was detailed in the notes the police took during his interview. Bill had told Lorene that he thought that pickup could have been Dick's. During her time at the Penhallow house, they mentioned that Bill's ex-girlfriend, Darlene Jervis, the one that was with him when they rescued Terri and Avra, still lived in town and was affectionately known as Boo. Bill's mother called Boo and handed the phone over to Terri. Terri told Boo about how much she wanted to meet her, and Boo, to her surprise, was excited to meet her too. Terri met up with her at a local coffee shop to get to know the woman that helped save her. It turned out that the night of the attack, she had actually dumped Bill, but he was so upset that they drove to Cline Falls to talk. Boo described how she was the one who urged Bill to stop and pick up the girl who stood outside covered in blood. Bill was worried that it was a setup. Boo said that when she got out of the truck, the first thing Terri said to her was, quote, "I was hatcheted up." It turned out police never interviewed Boo after they rescued the girls, but she had an interesting detail she shared with Terri. As the pair helped the girls into the truck, she remembered a vehicle driving by incredibly slowly. Terri had no memory of a vehicle outside of Bill's, but Bill did as well. I will say there was a difference in their accounts. Bill saw a truck, but Boo saw a car, and she was adamant about that. So that it's interesting how people are seeing the same thing, and yet everyone's recollection is slightly different. But it makes you wonder, who did that vehicle belong to? Was it this attempted murderer? Was it one of these witnesses who claims to have seen something? That's all I thought about throughout the whole book.
There's a part when Boo is describing the rescue, when they picked up Terri, got her stuff, and then went to get Avra, that Boo and Bill were standing over Avra, and Terri was there too in her sort of manic, survival mode, and that Bill and Boo both froze when they looked at Avra because they thought she is dead.
Yeah, they had a word for it too. It was a not dead silence, but they all had a word for it, that it was almost like everyone was holding their breath while they just stared at her. And then she blinked or moved or something.
Yeah, moved or breathed or something.
Yeah, that was an interesting part.
And then they got it back into action, yeah. But it's there was some just primal fear of touching a corpse.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen very often.
And also what was interesting, because Terri mentioned it, and I think I talked about it last time, but also Boo and Bill did too, that she didn't look hurt. She just looked perfectly pristine in the dark because her wound was on the back of her head.
Oh, yeah, so she just looked like a little peaceful sleeping angel.
Right, so to them, they didn't even know what had happened to her, but Terri had by then already reached the back of her head and felt the wound. And I just thought that was interesting that they all reflected on just her pale skin in the moonlight.
They were teenagers, right? They were young.
Yeah, they were 17 to 19.
Yeah,
I can't quite remember.
That too, having to. It would just be so unreal. My God. Anyways, that's all.
Terri eventually sat down with Bill, Lorene, and Boo, and all of them went back through their stories, filling in the blanks of the night. Terri would even form strong bonds with both Boo and Lorene and continued to speak to them regularly. Terri met with Lorene on her own a few days after their last meeting and learned even more detailed information about Dick Dam, the Hatchet Man. Lorene said that sometime after the attack, Dick confronted Bill's brother and told him he knew they were spreading rumors that he was the one who attacked the girls and that they better stop or he'll, quote, shut them up. Terri confided in Lorene that she had always thought the man that did this did so because he was mad at another woman. Lorene believed that matched up with Dick. He was definitely mad at women in general, perhaps his girlfriend Janie. With every minute of their conversation, Lorene seemed to get more and more engrossed in the idea of investigating and solving the case, and she essentially added herself into Terri's investigation. She wanted to help prove that he did it. She had an in with the locals and could start asking questions quietly. It would be less disruptive than the victim of the crime that shook the area coming back to interview a bunch of people and asking about Dick Dam. After all, according to Lorene, Dick Dam was dangerous, and she believed Terri needed to be careful and watch her back. With each conversation, Terri began to suspect that 17-year-old Dick Dam was the cowboy and not Bud Godwin. Spending time researching Godwin wasn't a waste of time for Terri, though. She continued to do her part to keep him behind bars, and her involvement in that helped to bring two people into her life that would help her in her investigation. Bob and Dee Dee Coons, who lived in Portland, Oregon. The Coonses were victims advocates who started a group called Crime Victims United. They worked through their own grief to help other families experiencing tragedies similar to the one they experienced by fighting for crime victims' rights and the implementation of mandatory sentencing laws. The Coonses had a daughter named Valerie, an aspiring filmmaker who lived in San Francisco. She went missing in November of 1980. When progress wasn't being made on their daughter's case, they chose to investigate it themselves and learned quickly that victims' rights needed to be protected. When Valerie went missing, her roommate couldn't get police to take her seriously about her concerns that Valerie was in danger. Eventually, when she was able to get a hold of Bob and Dee Dee, they flew to San Francisco and met with resistance from police who disregarded their worry. Then they went rogue, interviewed witnesses, hired their own investigators, and determined that there were multiple men involved, and police purposely screwed up the case because one of the suspects could provide them with information on other cases. Eventually, they later learned their daughter was abducted, drugged, held for several days, murdered, tied to a waste tub full of concrete, and thrown into a river. Her remains were found years later. Now, not only were Bob and Dee Dee incredibly valuable to Terri by sharing their experience investigating a crime so close to them, they were willing to help her keep Godwin behind bars and help her investigate Dick Dam. In fact, they were planning a trip to Central Oregon and decided to do some digging while they were in the area. Bob and Dee Dee started by speaking to witnesses like Adolph Wend, who was in the park the night of the attack. They were able to determine that he was a bit of a storyteller, and the local cops believed him to be a liar because he had given 3 different stories of the night of the attack. When Bob and Dee Dee talked to him, he said he saw 2 men in a truck or a van, and they drove over the tent repeatedly, which we know isn't true. Next up, the Coonses tackled the big guns. They drove out to Dick Dam's parents' house. Apparently, they were selling the property, so they went right up and pretended to be people interested in it. The couple chatted up Dick's mother, and she showed them pictures of her family, never once saying her son's name. They did learn, however, he had been living with his wife and child in Washington. Upon Terri's request, the Coonses talked to Robin Williams, the 14-year-old girl who was at Cline Falls the night of the attack and was also the niece of Bud Godwin. She was easy for Bob and Dee Dee to find, and she seemed more than willing to talk to them about what she had seen that night. She assured them that her uncle was not in Cline Falls, nor did she ever have an inappropriate relationship with him. Lastly, before the Coonses left Central Oregon, they went to the Redmond police station. During a casual conversation between Bob and one of the officers there, they learned that the Redmond PD wasn't really involved much in the case. But behind the scenes, the officers all believed that the axe-wielding psychopath had been a local teenager named Dick Dam. Up until that point, Bob and Dee Dee had suspected that Lorene had turned Terri's head, so to speak. Until that officer mentioned Dick by name and Robin assured them that her uncle wasn't in the park, they believed all signs pointed to Godwin. But now they had a gut feeling that Lorene and Terri were onto something. So something that I love about the Coonses is Bob had this knack for just talking to police. And Josh, do you remember, did he have a background as a police officer? Or
I don't remember that, no.
I feel like he was in some sort of club or something with other cops. So he had like a in to talk to them. And she just says a couple times throughout the book how easy it was for him to like, hey, casually chat with a coffee with a cop and then get some information.
Yeah, I feel like he has a very disarming personality. But then once they get into the serious stuff with him, which maybe you'll get into later, he is just such a clear communicator about the problems and the reasons they're there and the reasons that these things need to be done. I love Bob Coons.
In 1995, 18 years since the attack, Terri once again drove herself up to Oregon, this time to stay with Boo and her parents on their farm. It wasn't long until Terri shared with Boo her new theory planted by Lorene, that the teenage Dick Dam had been the cowboy that hacked at them with the hatchet the night Boo found Terri bloody and screaming for help. Boo wasn't shocked. She too had heard the rumors that he was indeed the Hatchet Man. She went on to say that she had heard his girlfriend had been hospitalized around the same time as the attack because she was beaten so badly by him. She also said there was a rumor that an axe was located in the river and it had the initials DD carved into the wooden handle. Terri asked Boo if she had ever interacted with Dick, and she said she had. She recalled that he was very fit but not super muscular. He was around 5'11", clean-shaven, and dressed like a cowboy in his Wranglers. Then she dug her high school yearbook out of storage and flipped to one of the pages to show Terri a photo of a 14-year-old Dick Dam. While Terri was in town visiting Boo, she resumed her investigation, locating and interviewing witnesses. She spoke to Robin Williams, who took her through the details she gave police and the Coonses. She mentioned how police suggested to her that her uncle had committed the crime, and she assured them he was not in the park that night. Terri asked her about Dick Dam, and while Robin didn't know much about him other than he was known for being a drunk, her husband recollected that he had been a very violent guy. Terri then went on to locate Dana Walters, one of the witnesses from Cline Falls that police interviewed early in their investigation. She found her listed phone number and called, and her father picked up the phone. Terri introduced herself as one of the women who was, quote, chopped up with an axe in Cline Falls State Park. And the man took a deep breath and said, unprompted, I might add, that everyone in Redmond thinks they know who did it, and they can't prove it. Terri was eager for more information. Dana's dad was a teacher. He had had Dick Dam in one of his classes and called him a, quote, psycho. He went on to tell Terri one of the rumors that really struck me as a solid reason to consider Dick Dam as the cowboy with the hatchet. Dana's father suggested that Dick drove a truck. Everyone knew he drove a black truck, and they had all heard that the tires on his truck matched the tire treads found at the scene of the crime. Terri eventually talked to Dana, too. Dana regaled how her and a friend went swimming at the swimming hole, and there was a guy just gawking at them the whole time, someone they would describe as suspicious. It bothered them so much that they left. Terri asked Dana if she would describe that person as messy. She said the guy was, quote, scrungy. This to Terri made her believe that the people who all described the man with the red pickup truck saw the same guy, but to Terri, this person couldn't be the attacker. She specifically recalled a very tidy cowboy, and so far this other person was just a messy, kind of short guy. But Dick Dam was a neat and attractive cowboy. Josh, one of the things that I started thinking about as I'm like reading account after account of this guy in the park is like, this poor guy, like he's probably a creeper, just hanging out in the park, didn't hurt anyone, but then he hears this attack happened, and like, what is he going to do? Go turn himself into police and be like, I'm the creepy guy in the park? Because he would have made himself the number one suspect at the time. And I just can't help but wonder if he was aware of this investigation.
Which guy are you talking about?
So there's the guy that all 5 witnesses say was like standing near a red truck or in a red truck or near the campsite.
And it was a guy that remained unidentified.
Unidentified,
right?
yeah. And I just wonder, like, was that a real guy who just happened to be there and maybe stared at people a little too long?
Yeah, I don't know. It kind of felt to me like it could be sort of like, I mean, it's been, 17 years or whatever, that the mind can kind of like produce things, I mean, based on the effect that the crime had on a lot of people, I could see them sort of becoming a part of the story, like making themselves a little bit.
Oh, definitely, especially with Adolf. He was like,
yes.
He had to be involved.
That's who I thought you were talking about.
No. So I just mean, as I'm reading through all these people describing a guy that seems very similar, I'm just imagining him in the car the next day, listening to the radio, hearing about the attack and going, oh shit, I shouldn't go in there. I don't know.
He could turn himself in to be like, hey, I just want to clarify. But don't look for that guy because I'm him, but also I didn't kill them.
And I don't know if anyone ever like vocalized about the guy they saw, but I just picture him being like torn on whether or not he should go in.
And maybe finding out for the first time that he's a creep.
Yeah.
Or that people see him as one.
Yeah.
Which is never fun.
No, I mean, do you know that from personal experience?
Yes.
Next on Terri's radar was the story-spinning boy named Adolf Wind, who contacted the police on 3 separate occasions and told them 3 different stories. All of his stories had components of seeing either one man or 2 men with a red truck and a white camper near the tent. But he also told police about a guy named Terry Wilson, who showed him a small collapsible hatchet, claiming it was related to the case, and he later turned it over to police. Terri formed the goal to get to the bottom of this hatchet rumor. She pulled up the police report that mentioned it. Quote, at 12:05 a.m., 6/26/77, contact was made with Terry Dean Wilson. Wilson confirmed that he had found the hatchet while swimming in the river during the afternoon of June 23, 1977. He reported that he was alone diving off the Highway 126 bridge when he found the hatchet approximately 10 to 15 feet upstream from the bridge. The blade was stained when he found the small axe. He later cleaned it at home with boiling water. The hatchet was later shown to Terri Jentz at the hospital. She was certain the instrument was not the same one she had glimpsed during the assault. This was not even close to the story Adolf had mentioned to Bob and Dee Dee when they were in town interviewing him. Now that Terri was able to sit down with him herself, she learned that his story did vary from hers quite a bit. He claimed to know that the perpetrator drove over the tent 3 times because he watched on from a higher vantage point. According to him, he was sitting on a ridge with his friends drinking beer when they heard the squealing or peeling out of a vehicle. They looked down and saw a dark van drive over the tent 3 times, and then a man got out of the van at least once. This conflicted with the police report where he described the vehicle as a red pickup, and he never mentioned seeing the attack. When she asked him about the hatchet Terri Wilson found, he said he didn't really remember it being a hatchet, but a baseball bat. Most of the details of Adolf's story were different from Terri's, so she told him her version, and he outwardly disagreed with her. And I think that is so funny. You're literally talking to the person it happened to, and you're like, no.
Actually, as a man, let me tell you what I actually
saw. That's not
saw.
what I saw. It's just like kind of funny.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Terri was ready to talk to Adolf's sister Kathy next, but by then, her updates to Bob and Dee Dee grew too exciting to not witness in person. They were in town within a matter of hours to join her for her next interview. They explained to Kathy they were interested in deciphering what stories were real and which ones were rumors. Kathy herself seemed to question the stories her brother told. He had been known to lie quite often. In fact, when Terri was visiting him, he had told her the story about his wife dying after getting hit by a drunk driver and that he had kids. Neither of these stories was true, so he just blatantly lies regularly. Kathy had also heard the moniker Dick Damn the Hatchet Man. She went on to say that she had heard 2 different rumors. One was that the hatchet was thrown in the river, and the other was that Dick kept it and even showed it off to a few people. Terri checked back in with the detectives who formerly worked on the case. Both Detective Cooley and Detective Durr only remembered one suspect, Bud Godwin. They had no recollection of Dick Dam. How was it that almost everyone they talked to in the town was aware that Dick had done this crime, but the 2 detectives working on the case didn't? Eventually, Terri's relationship with Lorene helped her get on the phone with someone she had been patiently waiting to talk to, Janie, Dick Dam's ex-girlfriend. Janie agreed to meet with Terri, and when she arrived, she announced that the truck she was driving was the same make and model as the one her old boyfriend used to drive, a 1974 Ford pickup. And something I don't actually put in this script, but I found very interesting, is that at one point, Terri actually laid underneath her truck to kind of like jog her memory and be like, yeah, this was the height of the vehicle. Can you imagine?
That's hardcore.
That reminds me of the girl in the box case where the people were like trying on the head box because the prosecutor was to like kind of put herself in the victim's shoes. I just can't imagine like coming face to face with your trauma like that. I mean, that's pretty cool. But side note that she did that. Over her past conversations, people had referred to this truck differently. One person claimed it was black. Another person said it was silver and blue. Janie told her it looked just like the blue one she drove, but it was 2 different shades of blue, and it had silver trim. Terri had her entourage with her, Boo, Dee Dee, and Bob, as well as a reporter she met while gathering the troops to block Bud Godwin from getting parole the last time. Janie was more than happy to talk about her time with Dick. He was known as a bad boy, but she had loved him. He liked to wear long-sleeved cowboy shirts that were custom-made by his mother, and he often wore Lee jeans.
Mommy, will you make me my special cowboy shirt?
I know, and he lived with his parents a long time. Very, like, doted upon.
Cute.
For many people, summertime means travel time. Whether you're going abroad or staying domestic and want to immerse yourself in the culture, now is the perfect time to start Babbel.
Babbel is the language learning app that has sold more than 10 million subscriptions. Thanks to Babbel's addictively fun and easy, bite-sized language lessons, there is still time to learn a new language before you reach your destination.
I started using Babbel a month ago to learn Spanish. I ended up choosing it because Spanish is spoken in 21 countries, and your girl likes to travel. Even if I'm not going anywhere international for a while, I can get myself prepared.
Babbel is a great way to learn Spanish or any of their 14 offered languages, including French, Italian, German, and more. Their 15-minute lessons make it the perfect way to learn a new language on the go.
Babbel lessons were created by over 100 language experts, and their teaching method has been scientifically proven to be effective.
There are so many ways to learn with Babbel. In addition to lessons, you can access podcasts, games, videos, stories, and even live classes. Plus, it comes with a 20-day money-back guarantee.
Start your new language learning journey today with Babbel.
Right now, save up to 60% off of your subscription when you go to babbel.com/rain. That's BABBEL.com/rain for up to 60% off of your subscription.
Babbel, language for life. She was only 15 when she started dating Dick and didn't have much self-esteem, and that's something I think appealed to him because he made sure to keep it like that. She took her captive audience back to the day Dick assaulted her and pushed her into the pond. The night before, she had been with Dick and he dropped her off at her home before 11 p.m. Reminder, this is the night of the attack. So he was with her, dropped her off at 11 p.m., and then he would have been alone. The next morning, she heard about the Cline Falls attack on the radio. She went to work, and at around lunchtime on the ranch, Dick pulled up in his truck, and it was clear that he was drunk off vodka. She found the half-full bottle in his truck. As she pulled it out to dump the rest of the vodka, she noticed that his toolbox on his truck was missing. She saw it as recently as the night before. Then Dick started screaming at her because one of his friends told him that she had thrown out the rest of his vodka. He chased after her and started hitting her. Then he started spitting out his Copenhagen chew on her. He kicked her a few times and she finally got up to get away and attempted to kick him in the crotch. This only made him angrier. She tried to jump into the pond to swim to the other side, but he chased after her and shouted, "I'm going to kill you, you bitch." He caught up to her, pushed her head under, and the other teenagers just watched on until one young girl, about 14 years old, picked up a rock and threatened to hit him over the head with it. Shortly after that, the ranch owner arrived, pulled Dick off of her, and Janie was put in a car that drove away while Dick chased after her, screaming that he loved her, and then he was eventually taken to jail.
I think, too, they said that all the other kids that were there, too, also jumped onto that car that was going away like they were escaping like a Independence Day fireball or something.
I don't remember that, but that sounds about right.
Like, they were like, everyone was freaking out.
Everyone was scared of him, and he's just like attacking his girlfriend in front of you. That's bold. That's
if
bold.
You're willing, whatever you're willing to do in front of people, it's way worse behind closed
Oh,
doors.
yeah.
So like you can't even imagine.
Janie confirmed that Dick had a hatchet and he usually kept it in the toolbox in the back of his truck. The box, which spanned the width of his entire truck, was wooden and painted white. The toolbox had always been there until that day, and then Janie never saw it again. Terri asked her to describe the hatchet, and she said that it had a wooden handle with a metal blade on one side. On the handle were 2 Ds that had been carved into the wood. And this is something that Dick did with a lot of his belongings. So he would either like etch it into metal or wood, but it was on like his belt buckle, his hatchet, his other tools.
So you knew he was a cool guy.
I mean, I just think it really establishes like that was his thing.
Yeah.
But I also think, stepping back for a moment, that could fuel the rumors of, oh, a hatchet was found. Oh, well, it had the DD in it, because everyone knows he does that, you know?
Yeah.
Terri asked Janie about what Lorene had said, that Dick had grabbed her and said, quote, "We got to get out of here. You don't know what I've done." Janie said that was not the case. He was mad about the vodka. He did not say anything Lorene remembered, but he was yelling. So maybe Lorene just, it's been over a decade. She wants this guy to be the bad guy. Maybe it's kind of morphed into something else. The next bit of information from Janie was regarding the tires Dick had on his truck. She was curious after hearing about what happened at Cline Falls, so her and some friends went there to go check out the tire tracks left at the crime scene. She believed they were his. He had mismatched tires on the front of his truck, and that was something she used to tease him about. Now, I found this part of the book particularly interesting because Janie describes herself to Terri as, quote, someone who has a knack for tracking tires like other people track footprints. And that got their attention. Like, this is someone that would have really valuable information for you. She would totally remember what the tracks looked like and what his tires looked like if it was that important to her. She was very adamant that those tire tracks were his, and that she was so adamant that her and her mom actually went to the police station to talk to them about that. And really, it just kind of got disregarded. After the incident that summer, Janie avoided Dick for the most part, but about a year later, he found his way back into her life. She had witnessed him do terrible things while they were together. He kicked her dog. He was mean to her family's cats. He even forced her to watch one of her cows as it was slaughtered, something he knew made her uncomfortable. She knew he enjoyed watching those terrible things happen and watching her witness them. Eventually, she did leave him. And then what did he do? He spread rumors about how she not only slept with the entire football team, but with dogs as well. So, great guy.
Mm-hmm.
Janie eventually moved to Portland and got married to one of Dick's friends. And so she did see him after moving away because when Dick got married, he brought his new wife, Ruby, to go meet her and her husband. And when they were there, she remembers seeing bruises on Ruby and being like, oh, he still abuses the women he's with.
How odd.
I know. It's a very small town, right?
Be like, let's go visit my ex-girlfriend and her new husband.
I
and I'll
mean,
show off my wife.
Maybe he changed how he interacted with her when he was with someone new, because it seems like a lot of people in this town like break up but are still in the same circles.
Yeah, I guess.
That to me doesn't seem odd as much as a type of control.
Scary.
Yeah,
like he's doing
definitely.
it on purpose. Like, look, now I'm
still in your life.
I'm
Well,
still in your
he's-
life and I'm hurting someone else and you
Yep.
can't do anything about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Terri learned from Janie's father, Bart, that the day Dick had assaulted Janie on the ranch, he was detained by police but never arrested. They kept him in the Prineville jail for the weekend but released him to his father's boss. Her parents were pissed. So they called their attorney and basically learned that there wasn't anything the police could do because he was under 18. However, if he had killed her, then they would have been able to arrest him. So basically, the only thing they could do to hold any accountability against him was that the parents had to pay for Janie's medical bills. So like Dick's family ended up sending them a check. And I just think that's so horrible. I can't even imagine as a parent, like seeing your daughter come home, having to go to the hospital for her
Yeah.
injuries,
Yeah.
and they won't do a thing. In 1995, Terri was in contact with a current detective named Fredrickson at the Oregon State Police. He had found notebooks used by Detective Durr and Cooley when they were originally working on the case. He said that there were hand-drawn photos in the notebooks that showed that the tire treads were not consistent with the ones Janie described as matching Dick's car. He also told Terri that he had followed up with Dick Dam, who had moved to Washington, and he said Dick agreed to take a polygraph test to clear himself of all these rumors that keep following him around. Now, he took that test, but the results were inconclusive because he was not only drinking, but he was taking muscle relaxers. Let's discuss these tire tracks. Go take a look at our latest blog up on our website. And Alicia, I have the photo here for you to see. I find it very funny that this new detective is dismissing Janie because how can you tell anything from this drawing?
Yeah.
Like,
it's
6 lines. The inner 4 are squiggly and the outer 2 are straight. That's the tire tread.
It looks more like someone was counting days or something. Just like
like a tally mark.
Yeah, tally mark.
Or
You're-
drawing bacon.
Yeah.
Bacon, yeah. Like, I can't believe that he's like, yep, that's proof. That's proof. They did their. So I think what happened was Janie and her mom go to police. They talk about the tire treads. He looks at his notes and is like, nope.
Wow.
So that way it didn't make the police report because it wasn't in there.
Wow.
Mind-boggling is my favorite tagline. That's what that is. Now, along with the drawing, there were a few notes, and they said, quote, assault vehicle had 2 bald tires 6-inch width, and 2 tires back bald possible, and 2 tires have tread, right front has 4 grooves, better tread than other. Now, those aren't great, but that does kind of match what Janie had said. They were mismatched tires, meaning some were bald, some had treads, they may have been different brands, and maybe, just maybe, they did look at Dick's truck because there were rumors that he had swapped the placement of the tires right after the attack. So what if they were looking for bald tires in specific locations and just didn't consider the fact that he could have changed them around? And I think that's insane that a detective wouldn't consider that. But, I mean, they weren't looking very hard for whoever committed this crime, so there you go. Terri did eventually stumble on evidence that Dick Dam had been investigated. She found an old article from the Bend Bulletin from June 27th, 1974. In it, it said that Detective Cooley had, quote, plans to talk to a 17-year-old youth charged Friday with assault in connection with a beating incident involving his girlfriend, but doesn't expect to tie the youth to the Cline Falls attack. The youth was charged by Deschutes County Sheriff's deputies and detained over the weekend at Prineville City Jail. Dick Dam eventually took a second polygraph test, the deceptive results of which made police wonder if Terri was right all along. When confronted that his results were deceptive, he acted oddly or perhaps guilty, crying, saying things like, "Not a day goes by that I don't think about this," and even reaching for the hand of the administrator, Fred Ackham. Fred told police and Terri that he was sure Dick Dam did it. The way he talked, cried, reached for him, he had all the telltale signs, but unfortunately, that wasn't proof. What they needed was an admission. Terri and Fred plotted ways they might coax Dick into giving one. Perhaps a recording of Terry's voice would get to him. Unfortunately, he never did admit guilt, at least not to anyone who could arrest him. The state police determined that the case would be taken on by Sergeant Marlon Hine. It was 18 years later, so while the case could not result in an arrest and prosecution, it could help the statute of limitations, and that it did. Eventually, the statute of limitations for attempted murder went from 3 years to not having a limit.
I am glad to hear that because it's so upsetting. The idea of because someone is fighting or someone got lucky or someone got help soon enough, like, oh, sorry, that doesn't count. It's not as serious. It's
I never understand a statute of limitations on a crime in general. I mean, I guess some things are easier to explain to me than others, but on murder and attempted murder, that is crazy. Like, what if someone was in a coma for 10 years and woke up?
Or at least have degrees. Like, if a teenager throws a rock over an overpass, that is attempted murder because you could have killed someone, but indirectly. This, you drove over 2 people and you took a hatchet to them.
Yeah.
Like,
you intended to kill them.
You tried to kill them.
Yeah.
They're lucky to be alive because of their own fight.
I was unaware of that. So I know right now we don't have a statute of limitation on murder or attempted murder. But when I read this book, I'm like, I'm sorry, 3 years? Because right now we have a 3 years on assault.
Yeah.
So on an assault, there is a statute of limitations. But this is someone violently trying to kill someone.
Yeah, like one of the most horrific ways you could imagine. Yeah.
Shit eventually got real. Police wanted Dick to take a third polygraph, one where they were sure he wasn't on drugs or alcohol. The day after he got this notification, there was a phone call made to police threatening them that if another police officer went on Dam property, they would be shot. This forced the sergeant to put out an officer safety alert to ensure all officers used extreme caution if they ran into Dick Dam. And of course, when the officer arrived to pick him up for his third polygraph, he wasn't there. He was avoiding them. Big shock.
Can you do that? Can you tell the cops, if you come to my house, I'll shoot you?
I know. Isn't that still a crime?
Seems
like you're warning them that you're going to be defending your property. I don't really know how that works.
Yikes.
With Boo at her side, Terri was able to speak with Ruby, Dick's ex-wife. The pair had to travel to